Hi, I'm David Boje, and I'm going to talk to you about how to cure greed in the corporations and the political institutions. I'm talking about a true storytelling so powerful that it will change the nature of the way leaders lead in organizations. Now, I've done a lot of work on this over the past 40 years, and I linked up with the True Storytelling group, Jens Larsen and Lena Bruun, and we wrote the book True Storytelling. And while it's not all about taking away greed, we sure can help. So we look at the living stories. We look at the little stories that people forget. Those quick trips to the water cooler where we have that conversation and we tell what's true. I'm interested in indigenous ways of knowing, what's called living stories. I learned it from Kaylin Two Trees many years ago, how living stories are deeply rooted in a specific time and place, in a context, and that place has energy and meaning and aliveness. Living stories are a living, breathing entity of aliveness. It takes us to a much deeper level than your corporate annual report or your CEO's speech or even these presidential speeches. A few carefully generated words of living story comes from generations of wisdoms. Living stories are more than just words on an annual report or the text. My work is all about the kinds of authentic, genuine, true storytelling and the kind of grand narratives, that linear thinking that's in so many corporate boardrooms and governments and universities. So I'm challenging the greed that is a part of our time. So with Lena Bruun and Jens Larsen, we wrote the True Storytelling book. It was published in 2021. We lay out the 7 principles of true storytelling. And these true storytelling principles are linked to living story and recognizes these kinds of true storytelling and, as we say, how to help these stories along, how to respect these stories that are already there. So it's very important to constantly reflect that 7th principle in our decisions using intuition and evidence. Even the tool of abduction, induction, deduction, a self-correcting spiral that we teach in true storytelling comes from the work of the American pragmatist, right? And Charles Saunders Peirce. But here I want to talk about philosopher Jacque Derrida, who offers another angle to living story and what is true storytelling. Derrida challenges those corporate linear narratives that we talked about. I want to tell you more about this. Derrida was all about embracing ambiguity and questioning the very idea that there's any single one story of truth. Rather, living stories are fluid, ever-changing, and defy these categorizations of one true narrative. It makes space for a lot of different voices in a corporation or government. It connects back to this indigenous way of knowing living story. It's about context and aliveness. It's an understanding that stories are constantly changing and rechanging by the people that are telling them and by the shifts in the context. So we want to look at this Derrida notion of living story and indigenous living story and how we incorporate both of these in the true storytelling approach. How do we begin to grasp this way of multi-layered true storytelling? I invented anti-narrative back in 2001. Anti-narrative processes, storytelling processes, and I connect it to all of the true storytelling principles. Antenarratives are speculative, fragmented bits and pieces that exist before and beneath the true storytelling that emerges, but it also exists below and beneath the inauthentic storytelling, the greed storytelling that emerges. You know, those stories you hear, but you never tell the boss, those untold stories, they are really important, those little wow moments of the past. And they can gel into these living storytelling approaches that we teach. So let's take it through the 7 true storytelling principles and each of the 7 B's of antenarrative. I use B words because they relate to the true storytelling principles. Let's go one principle at a time. So beneath the first principle of what's true and what's sustainable, beneath those opinions and facts that we like to talk about, there are these other voices, these other ways of looking at the situation, other than just what the CEO says is true or what the latest public relation announcement says is true. We need to go deeper than that if we're going to cure greed. We need to learn the antenarratives that came before that announcement. So the before looks at a respect in true storytelling for stories already there, big or small, the little wow moments of exception, those historical turning points that led up to what's happening now. There's always a before, there's always many histories of the before. Now, Betts is about that true storytelling principle of having a direction, having a plot, prioritizing in the future. But Betts is also about anteing up the resources we make in our bets on the future in those plots, and recognizing there's many different plots happening at the same time. We have a plot, our competitors have a plot, our customers have a plot. Within an organization, there's many plots swirling around, many bets on the future. It gets even more interesting, I think, when we go to being. You must have timing is the true storytelling principle. And it's all about our lived experience, our living story experience in a context, in the time, but also in the place, in the living place. It's a constant interplaying between the true storytelling we tell ourselves, their being. And now we do the becoming, this notion that we're helping stories along. That's the true storytelling principle. Now you can see how these B's, these storytelling principles, are interrelated. And it leads to a whole web of relationships. It's not about the what, it's about the why behind these principles, and that's where antenarrative helps. We can expand the living storytelling even further when we get to the between, right? The true storytelling principle of the artifacts, the scenography we need to communicate true storytelling. We need to find about how to deal with the 4 who's. The who of your ego, the who of the corporation that dominates your ego, your social who of the family, your relationships, right? And the ecological who. Your true storytelling is in the middle of that, is in between. Now, the last true storytelling principle is reflection. It's deep, what I call, into the antenarrative of the beyond, the ethical and the philosophical implications of our true storytelling, of our living storytellings that we embrace. It challenges to look beyond ourselves into the whole context of living story, the ecological sustainability of our corporation. And that's how we cure greed and get beyond it with true storytelling principles and the 7 B's of antenarrative. So let's get practical now. It's not about dismissing abstract narratives. We need annual reports. We need CEO speeches. We need public relations to get us out of trouble from time to time. But if we stop there, we're going to be descending into the abyss of greed. And this is where we need living stories. We need these aunties, the 7 Bs, and we need the 7 true storytelling principles. And finding the balance, that's what together telling and together listening is all about in true storytelling. We need some structure to make sense of all the complexity. That's where these linear narratives do help. But we need to understand the dynamic nature of true storytelling to bring it all together. It goes beyond just telling a factual story or an opinion or the CEO story of the week. It's about the living stories that we are in the web of life, living in that web of life. It's about deep self-reflection, that 7th true storytelling principle, and going into the beyond, even a spiritual ecology. Our spiritual life that we've learned to park at the door of a corporation and when we go to work. We are bombarded by social media, all these spins, all these corporate lies, all this kind of deceptions, and we can't find the true story anymore. It's like a needle in the haystack, and that's where we need true storytelling principles. We need the antenarrative-storytelling, and we need to understand the living stories, both Derrida's and the Indigenous Living Stories. So how do we embrace this true storytelling approach? Get more authentic, more genuine, put some veracity into our storytelling. It's by engaging with the stories that are all around us. That's what I'm doing today. I'm taking on greed. Who does that anymore? It's like I'm against Monopoly, the board game. And also what it is in capitalism. What are we missing if we only focus on greed and those linear narratives, those simpleton narratives that drown out the living stories, that drown out the kind of true storytelling principles that I'm talking about today? We can discover a richer, more meaningful understanding of the world around us, and that's really important if we want to cure greed, if we want to live the true storytelling life, if we want to embrace the living stories, either by Derrida or Indigenous or the places where they overlap. And that's the important message today, that true storytelling is an amazing process with wonderful principles. Hey, send your CEO for deprogramming. Get them out of the greed and exploitation paradigm. Let them encounter life of the true storytelling and the living story. Okay, if you like this presentation, give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Put a comment in. Share it with your friends. Subscribe, because I got more material coming out, and I read your comments and I make new material. So this is David Boje signing off from True Storytelling, the living story, these 7 Bs. All right, have a good day. Appreciate it if you give us a like, a share, and subscribe. I'll answer your questions and put it out in the next video. Thank you.